Yeah, no, so bad. Yeah, I think, yeah, Rebecca's going to be a little bit late, but I think she'll make it. So I'll leave that for her. Okay, so I want to really quickly just look at a couple of the homework files. Again, I'm not pointing anybody out. What I'm showing are sort of general problems that I saw, just or not necessarily problems. I'll show a couple of things here really quickly. So the first one I want to show you guys is Andrew's right here. So Andrew started most of the way. This is I'm sorry, what? Oh, sorry, you can't see me. All right, hang on one sec. Let me just get this reset. So this is one of the ones that Andrew did, and in many ways he had most of the ideas about this actually correct. He's got layer masks on here that are actually controlling. For instance, this was a lightning layer that he actually used. However, the problem with this is that instead of actually, and these are smart objects, these are actually the raw files. So for instance, if I double click on this guy, I'll open, that'll come right back up into Photoshop. However, in Camera Raw. However, in this Camera Raw, there's actually been very little that has been changed. A little bit has been changed, but mostly it's default. But the issue is here, then he actually used Camera Raw filter on these. So this is now a smart filter. And if you open this up, he's actually done the work here in the Camera Raw filter. That is a completely different way of actually doing it. So if you were to open the smart object up and do whatever work you did, this is actually the raw data and you are processing the raw data. However, once you bring this into Photoshop now, even though this is a smart object that is containing it, this smart filter, even though it looks to be exactly the same, is actually now trying to work on a file that has been baked, that's already been processed. This smart object right here, for all practical purposes, has been processed. So this is now 8-bit image. It's restricted to a tonal range of 0 to 255, whereas if you double-click the smart object, this is now the raw data. This is more like a 14-bit file because this is actually coming directly from the camera. It's got much larger dynamic range. You can do a whole lot more on this without damaging the file than you can once it actually comes into Photoshop, and you do it with this Camera Raw filter. Does that make sense to everybody? Are we good on that, Andrew? Did that make sense? Yep, okay. But the rest of it, the idea you had was exactly correct, okay? The work that you did in the filter was great. The masks were great. The fact that you brought it in as smart objects were great. All of that part worked out really well. It's just that difference, and I can understand how easy it is. This filter didn't used to exist. It's up here in where this comes from. It's up here in the filter menu, and it's right down here, the Camera Raw filter. But this, again, is nowhere near, even though it looks the same, it is head over heels different than actually doing this very same work in Camera Raw. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. She's not here right now, but again, I want to show you Rebecca's really quick. She was not the only person to do this, so I just want to point this out. A couple things to you guys. Oh, actually, I opened up, well, I can show it to you here, but there's actually a funnier thing here I want to open up. I have a sense of humor, and I love the people who play into that, and clearly she decided to do that. So in this case, what I wanted to point out is that she's actually working in 16-bit. You can see it's right up here. It's this guy right here. If you click on this drop-down menu right here at the bottom of your screen, mine's set up to give me the readout right now, to give me the size of the file readout, but you can change this to give you all sorts of different information. I'm going to change it back to the profile, and you can see she is working in Adobe RGB, but she is also working in 16-bit. I'm okay with that. Again, we talked about bit depth. Did we talk about bit depth in this class? So bit depth is simply saying that instead of her working with 8-bit, which would give us roughly 16 million colors, she's actually working in 16-bit, which is on the order of 281 trillion colors. It's just a, it's not that you get, it's just this, because this part's really important. It's not that you get more colors. It's not that you get more saturated colors or deeper colors. To get a more saturated color, you would actually have to go to a bigger color space like ProPhoto RGB. But if she stays in Adobe RGB, she doesn't get any more color, any more saturated colors, any colors that are further out in the gamut than would be the case. But what she does get is a whole lot more colors in between, so she gets much, much more nuanced color. Does that make sense? So instead of having 16 million colors to describe that space, she's describing it with 281 trillion colors. So the space from one color to the next is much smaller. Those little increments as you start moving from one color to the next, whatever, are much, much smaller in 16-bit. Does that make sense what we're going through here? So frankly, I don't think that there's really a need to do this. And the reason I don't think there's a need to do this is because of this. If you double click on the smart object and you actually go back into Camera Raw, this is now the raw data of your file. So this is the complete color space of your camera. It's not Adobe RGB. It's unique to your camera. It's whatever your camera sensor can grab. We don't really care what color space that is. It's just that that defines the color space of your camera. It's whatever your sensor can grab. It is unique to your camera. The same brands of cameras, whatever, will be slightly different, but for the most part, this is also in 14-bit. So it's a richer color set. It's not the 281 trillion colors. It's going to be somewhere between the 16.7 million of an 8-bit and the, again, we can figure it out. If you just do 2 times 2, 14 times, whatever number you come up with is going to be the bit depth of your camera. So the reason it doesn't matter to me so much is that once I go into Photoshop, I'm in Adobe RGB and I'm in 8-bit. And the reason that doesn't matter to me so much is that every single monitor in the world, the best of them, are 8-bit Adobe RGB. So even if you could somehow imagine a future where there might be a monitor that could show you ProPhoto, that'd be great. But that, in my opinion, is never going to happen. These also are not 16-bit. So what you see and what you actually work on, the best of it all is Adobe RGB and 8-bit. Why on earth would you be working in 16-bit, which is twice the file size? And why also on earth would you actually be working in ProPhoto? Now, we didn't look at this, so I want to show this to you really quickly because we did not talk about working. We didn't talk about, in this class, we have not had the conversation yet about rendering intents, have we? Okay, well, so we're going to do this really quickly right now because this has everything to do with color space. So I want to show you a quick file first. It's not going to be a huge lecture, guys. It's just going to be a couple of pictures we're going to look at that sit inside of a lecture. Well, there'll be a small part of the lecture part, but not too bad. So we did not look at this earlier, but this is actually, and don't worry about so much, but has anybody ever seen this thing before? It goes to show how observant you always end up seeing this when you actually do a calibration of a monitor. This thing comes up. You'll actually see it. This is an extremely famous, they call it, don't worry about this X, small y, large X stuff. We don't need to get into explain that. Just suffice it to say that what this tries to do is this is a representation of human vision, of what you can actually see. However, there's one thing missing from this. What's missing from this guy right here? This color diagram doesn't work. Exactly, lightness. When we look at this is hue, which is, again, hue would be the thing that we consider to be color. It's what makes red different from green, makes green different from yellow. That is the concept of hue. And then saturation. Saturation is the purity of that color. On one end, you've got a pure color. On the other end, you don't have the complement. You've got no color. You've got gray. Make sense, right? So and that's what's happening here. If you look at it, these are reds over here. This is the pure red as you can get. Up in here are the greens. Down in here are the blues. So this is your RGB. Again, you get the cyans in the middle, the yellows in the middle, and the magentas in the middle here. Right in the center right here where this all sort of like neutralizes out, this is actually neutral gray. So you can see, again, the complement of red is the cyan as you start to go through this part right here. This would be a neutral gray. However, you don't have any of the lightness, which would represent making this whole thing lighter and then the whole thing darker as well. That component has been removed from this. So this is very much like the color wheel. But what's important about this is that this represents the range of human vision. Now, again, this is a projector that's showing you this. This is a representation. Clearly, your eyes can see greater color than this. But this gives us a reference that we can work with and we can compare gamuts to. And what I mean by gamuts are this. If you look at, again, the horseshoe shape thing, and this never looked like a horseshoe to me, but that's the way they always refer to it. They'll always call it the horseshoe shape of a chromaticity diagram. This is human vision. If you look at the purple line that's inside right here, this purple line would be photographic film. So again, and this would be color transparency film. So like an E6 film or Kodachrome. Well, Kodachrome you can't get anymore, but nonetheless, which has got a little bit larger color gamut than negative film does. But at any rate, so that's what that is. The red line that's in right here would be a typical RGB monitor, albeit a shitty one. The little dotted cyan line that's in here would be the typical thing that you would get out of a CMYK press. So all that this is allowing us to do is compare sort of what we can see to what a monitor can show us to what a printer can actually print. And what you'll notice is clearly these spaces are the monitor space and the printer space are much smaller than what you can see. You can actually see a whole lot more color than you can see on a monitor or that you can print. Does that make sense what's going on here? What you'll also notice about this, though, is that when you look at the monitor space right here, which is this red line, you will see that there is a whole lot of areas outside of the blue dotted line, like this area right in here, that your monitor can show you this color, but the printer can't print this color. Does that make sense what's going on? So for instance, C2 is a color that exists. This is up in the green area up in here. This is a color that exists that your monitor can show you, but your printer can't print it. The best your printer can do is actually right here at C1. Does that make sense what we're talking about here? So there's a problem that we run into in printing. In all the area that sits in here that's common to everybody, that's not a problem at all. You can see it on your monitor, your eyeballs can see it, your printer can print it. That's not an issue. What is an issue here, specifically for us, is what our monitor can show us but the printer can't print. There's another twist in this, and it's this area right here. You see this area right here that I'm talking about, this area right in here? This is an area where your printer can actually print this, but your monitor can't show it to you. So to see this really quickly, I need everybody to jump onto their computer really quick. Go to the Applications folder, please. So again, into your computer, into the Finder. Open up a window. If you don't see your boot drive in here, just hit Command-N. It'll open up a window. Click on Applications over on the side panel. Scroll down to the bottom to the Utilities folder. Click on Utilities. Come down and you're looking for Color Sync Utility. We've visited this guy before. Go ahead and double-click to open that up. When it gets open, you've got a series of icons along the very top. You don't want to pick the first one that says Profile First Aid. You want to pick the second one that actually says Profiles. And then if you have a drop-down menu, hopefully you do, you'll see System. Click on the little drop-down guy and then click on Adobe RGB. And this is, again, is the color space. This is the Adobe RGB color space that you can actually spin around. Again, this is based on, we didn't really talk about the Munsell system, but this is based on an HSB system where you've actually got hue that goes around the outside border of this. Saturation is going from one side to the other. So in the very middle would be completely neutral. You can't see that. Because it's in the very center of this space. And then you've got white, if we consider this sort of like the globe or the earth. White would actually be at the North Pole, black at the South Pole, so you can spin this guy around. The other thing that you can do about this, though, is you can actually click on the top left-hand corner. If you click on this little black arrow, drop-down arrow, what you will see is you can actually hold this space for comparison, because we're going to compare this to printing space. So you'll see that this thing gets sort of ghosted out, and then you need to see if you can find. Now, most of these computers do not have a bunch of color printing spaces on them. So I think if you look through, you'll have to click on drop down. It's usually in the other. Yeah, click on that, and then click on the drop down of that guy too, of support, and you can find like I'm not still seeing any printer in there. Click on that guy, drop down. Yeah, there's one in there. So if you click on this, it looks like under Other, click on Other, you should have, let me scroll my window over to really read what it is. If you click on Other, under Support, Adobe Color Profiles Recommended, I think you can find like a US sheet fed coded. Do you see that in there anywhere? Okay, well, it's just a printing space. If you can't find it, I don't want to spend hours doing this. Just take a look up at my screen. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. But this actually is a typical printing press in the United States. And what you can now see if you spin these guys around is this is actually what we were just looking at, the diagram. That would actually have been a CMYK press. You can see how much smaller the color space of that printer is relative to the Adobe RGB space. The part that is now completely ghosted out is areas that you can see on your monitor, if your monitor could show you Adobe RGB. The higher prepress monitors, not like a Mac, iMac or a laptop, but actually a decent prepress monitor can actually show you the majority of that Adobe RGB space. But you can see the difference. You can also see this area right here where it looks like the CMYK printer is actually blown outside of the Adobe RGB, and that's indeed what's happened. This is the area outside right here that a printer can print. These are colors a printer can print, but that your monitor cannot show you if your monitor is showing you Adobe RGB. Does that make sense what we're looking at here? Are there questions about this? Okay, so with that being said, back to this. So when we talk about the color spaces that are actually inside of Photoshop relative to this, you can map those as well. Now remember, the color spaces that are inside of Photoshop, sRGB, Adobe RGB, ProPhoto RGB, are theoretical mathematical spaces. They're based on math. They are common to everybody's machine, and that is a boon to us because it allows us to swap files back and forth with each other, and they always go into the exact same space. So if I give one of my files to Tyke, he opens it up in his Photoshop. It's exactly the same as mine because his Adobe RGB space is exactly the same as mine. It's not device dependent. It is a theoretical mathematical space. That makes sense, right? That's how we do all this file exchanging. Then you have to have a profile for your monitor. I've got one for this. I've got a different one for this. He's got a different one for that. The profiles then take that information out of that mathematical space into a dependent device and adjust it so that what I'm looking at is identical on this machine, that machine, and every machine in the room, right? So those are theoretical spaces, but look at them and how they compare. You can see right here that the squiggly line around here is a typical matte paper printout on an Epson 4800 inkjet printer. Again, not too dissimilar to what the CMYK printer that we saw earlier. However, what you can also notice in this guy is this is the sRGB photo space, and it's actually the smallest of the triangles right in here. You can actually see it. And it is a perfect triangle like this because, again, this is a mathematical space. The reason the matte one is so squiggly here is that this is organic. This is actually an organic response. This is a measured response of 4800 printing on matte paper. So it's not going to be these perfect straight edge sides, but because these are theoretical spaces that are created by math, they are exactly perfect triangles. So you can see the sRGB one is relatively small, although what you also notice is that everybody is common in the green, in this red area. They all can reproduce roughly the same amount of reds. And they can also do a very good job at getting close to the blues. Where things really go off the rail is up here in the greens. That's where things have a problem. So this is sRGB, the smallest of the triangles. You can see that Adobe RGB is considerably larger, and then ProPhoto finally is considerably larger still. However, we've already talked about it because ProPhoto space is so large, you have to be working in 16-bit to actually have enough colors to describe the space without getting into trouble. The problem that you get into with working in ProPhoto RGB in 8-bit is that because you have so few colors to describe the space and the space is so big, it separates those colors really, really, really far from one another. And so instead of having the appearance of smooth gradients of color, you have stair-stepping of color. Does that make sense? Does that not make sense to anybody? So there's one other problem with ProPhoto RGB. Looking at this, what do you see as an issue? It's exactly right. Hitting the nail right on the head. You see this area right up here? This is color that you can have in ProPhoto RGB that your eyes cannot see. Same thing in all of these blues in here. This, again, human vision is this a horseshoe shape out here. All the blues in this area right here, your eyeballs can never see. All the greens up in here, your eyeballs can never see that. That's a problem to me in my book. Your monitor has no prayer of showing it to you, but Photoshop's a very powerful tool. It's just math. It can take your colors that you started out with that are in this area, and it can shove them out to here. That's the easiest thing in the world to do. It's just math. So there are problems with ProPhoto RGB. Does everybody get this? I'm clearly not a big fan of it. There's a lot of people, though, that would argue me down on that one. However, the one last thing I do want to show you, and it is about rendering intents, since we have not talked about this. Now, every time you guys actually go to do a print, you're actually asked to do a rendering intent. Most of you are familiar with either perceptual or relative colorimetric. Those are usually the choices that photographers make. However, have you been told to use one or the other? Have you been told to use a rendering intent? We'll look at this in Photoshop again. Most people are just flat out told, if you're a photographer, use perceptual. That's what everybody hears, right? My comment back to them is why? Do you know why? Can you tell me why? Well, because I read it. Yeah, I read it on the internet. I saw it on a YouTube video. I reject that. I still think that you guys should be making informed decisions. And so we are going to look at what an informed decision about rendering intents are. But first we have to figure out what it is they're really talking about. So we did, in this class, didn't we do this last week? Didn't we create a printer profile? Have we done that in this class? I'm sorry? We did it. We didn't do it in this class? Okay, well, we're going to do that today then. So we will generate a custom printer profile today so that you guys can see how it is. However, you guys are familiar with using printer profiles in Photoshop, right? You go to the print dialog box. Again, we'll look at all of it where you have to pick the profile that matches your paper and the printer you're using. And that does an excellent job at trying to take color from, again, a device-independent color space like Adobe RGB and adjusting the color so that it is reproducible, so that if I've got my color managed workflow going well, then what's happening is that I go out of Photoshop through a profile to a specific printer with a specific piece of paper in it, and as long as this part is actually done correctly, then in theory, the color that I'm seeing on my monitor, because my monitor profile is doing the correction out of Adobe RGB into the monitor, that my printer profile is actually doing the same thing here. And if it's all working well, as it should, the color that I'm seeing here is also the color that I'm going to get on my printer. However, the color isn't the issue now. The color we've got to match. What's at issue now are the colors that are out of gamut. And again, what I mean by out of gamut is this. When you look at this triangle here is what your monitor can show you. The area in here that's the cyan dotted line here is what your printer can give you. And all the colors that are common to both are fine. That's not the problem. It's the colors that are outside. It's the colors here in this green area. How do I deal with this color? I don't want to just throw it away. I don't want to just like, oh, just chop it off. I don't want to do that. That's detail, that's image, that's all sorts of things, right? I want to maintain that somehow. That's what rendering intents do. It's how do you take the colors that are outside and bring them in so that you can actually see them. So this is sort of what we're looking at here. if you look at this illustration right here, in the circle here in the middle, now again, this is just a simplified thing. So again, these shapes would be different, but just to give this for illustrative purposes. In the circle in here is the CMYK gamut. This is what my printer can actually print. The bigger circle that's around here is the RGB gamut. Again, what my monitor can show you. Does that make sense what's going on here? In the first set of colors right here, 1, 2, 3 are actually common to both of these. If all of my image was made up of just these colors in here, there would be no issue at all. It wouldn't matter. I would just be looking the colors that were on my monitor. My printer could print all of them. That would not be the issue. What's an issue for me is this. These are the out-of-gamut colors. These are colors that exist in this RGB space that are not inside this CMYK space. Somehow I need to deal with this stuff that's out here. The way this thing is designed, the way to think about it is that the out-of-gamut primarily deals with saturation. Again, this area right in the very middle right here is neutral gray. As you start moving out to these edges out here, this would be the most saturated color that a CMYK printer can print. This edge out here would be the most saturated color that an RGB monitor can show you. Does that make sense to you guys? Does that not make sense to anybody? So it is this saturation issue. That's the problem. And instinctively, you all know this. You can see incredibly saturated colors on your monitor that you can't get in a print. That happens all the time, right? You see an incredibly intense bright red on here, and you go to print it out, and it's kind of an okay red. So somehow I need to, I need to move this information, this stuff that's out here into this, or to deal with it some way. What is the difference in 4, 5, and 6? I just told you. Saturation, right? Does that mean each 4, 5, and 6 are each different colors? Well, they're actually the same hue. They're just different in saturation. So they're going to appear to be different to you. They will not appear to be the same, right? What does that represent to you in an image? Detail. Right? If I take these 3 things right here, 4, 5, and 6 that are out of gamut here, if I make them all exactly the same, haven't I just thrown that detail away? The differences in these represent detail to me. So you can think of it if you take, and this is actually what happens in JPEGs, and you'll see this happen in JPEGs, is they'll look at colors that are extremely close to one another, and they'll make them all the same color. And so then instead of having to describe each individual pixel, they can describe a large area. That's what compression in JPEG actually does. So this is the same issue that we're going to actually face here. So is the setup here clear to everybody? Okay, so as we start in here, the first match rendering intent that you actually have is saturation. And what happens in saturation is that 4, 5, and 6 are all brought right to the edge of CMYK and printed at the most intense saturation that CMYK can do. However, all the colors that are in gamut as well are also pushed more to the outside so that they are actually more saturated as well. So it fucks up all the color. Why on earth would you ever have this? Anybody ever seen the back page of USA Today where they have the weather map that's all in different colors? And don't you always look at it and go, why the fuck did they pick colors so close to each other? I always do that. It's like, wait a minute. The red is next to another one that's almost red. They look the same. I can't tell which is which, right? Well, it doesn't matter to me what the colors are. What I care about is that they're distinctly different from one another. That is what saturation mapping is actually built for. This is for graphics professionals, not photographers at all. You would never use saturation rendering intent. The next one is perceptual, and this is the one you've all been told to use, or most people have been told to use. And what happens in perceptual is this. It takes the farthest color out, the most saturated RGB color, and it brings it right to the edge that the CMYK printer can actually print. So the most saturated gets mapped to the most saturated. Does that make sense? Then everybody else is brought inside the space, but it's kept. The relationship between 4, 5, and 6 is maintained. Why? Detail. It maintains detail, right? However, if you do that and you want to keep true color relationships, you've also got to move 1, 2, and 3. The colors that are in gamut also need to be moved so that you maintain the relationship between all 6 of those colors. So you maintain the detail, but you also maintain the relationship. The problem is there's not one single color in perceptual that is your true color. Every single color in your file is changed. However, Human eyes are extremely adaptable, and they adapt to this. What human eyes are more concerned with is the relationship of these colors, not the actual purity of the color. Does that make sense? So you can change them all. You're keeping the relationship, you're keeping all the detail, but none of the color is the true color. Now, for most people, that's not a problem. But if you are like shooting an ad for Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola Red is a trademark color. They care that that color is real. And if you do this, you're going to change that color. It will not be real no matter how much you argue it to them. And there you go. Make sense? So finally, the last one that you get is colorimetric, and there's two versions of this. In colorimetric, what happens is this. All the saturated colors are actually brought to this same point right here, which causes you to lose. They all become the exact same thing. So you lose all that detail. We already talked about that, right? However, you do not move the colors that are in gamut at all. These colors that are in gamut remain true and unchanged. Why on earth would you ever use this? If you have an image that has very little out of gamut, then you change nothing. Does that make sense? So the choice, and then there's two versions of color of colorimetric, relative or absolute. Just to give you an analogy, an image, and then we're actually going to look at this, and we're going to do this with an image to find out what coloring intent you should really be using. Here's the thing. With relative colorimetric, what relative colorimetric does is it takes the white point. Again, we've talked about the white point of your color space, and it matches it. So it would take the white point of your monitor and match it to the white point of the printer. That is relative colorimetric. In absolute colorimetric, what it does is it actually tries to recreate the white point of your color space and then remap the color on top of it, which is confusing. So here's my analogy. You do a scan of a really old piece of newspaper, and it's yellow. That makes sense? Really old piece of newsprint, something 300 years, 200 years old, whatever. It's turned yellow. You scan it, and you want to do a print of it. Using relative colorimetric, it will look at the white point of your scan and match it to the white point of your piece of paper. And when you do that printout, it will look like the old newspaper. Make sense? In absolute colorimetric, what it will do is it will look at that yellow newspaper. It will try to make your white piece of paper look like that yellow newspaper, and then it will print the yellow on top of that newsprint a second time. So you get a double hit of yellow. Does that make sense? There are reasons that certain graphics people want to use absolute colorimetric. No photographer ever will. Are we good on this? So let's look at why you would ever use any of these guys. I'm going to jump out of this really quick. If you look back in the folder from week number 2, I think is where it is. I'm looking for the red car. You guys remember the red car? Was that week 1 or 2? I've got it in week 2. Can you guys find it? If you can't find it, or if you don't have it on your hard drive, the entire assignment folder is still on the class partition. Simply go into the assignment complete FA 2016 in week 2. Drag the file out to your desktop though. This server is not very happy about running files off of itself, so it just makes sense to copy it. So does everybody have this guy? Okay. So in Photoshop, there is a way that you can actually see colors that are out of gamut. To do that, you come up to the View menu, and you come down to Gamut Warning. So if you can see my screen. Now, if you click on this, do you guys get a bright green or do you get a gray? Good. The bright green is not by default. And we talked about this in terms of setting up your files in Photoshop in the very beginning. If you get that gray, which is what Photoshop does by default that you really can't see, it's because you've set this wrong. In your Photoshop memory down in Preferences down here in Transparency and Gamut, this color by default is a middle gray. If you click on it and simply make it a pure green, 255G, you'll be able to spot out of gamut color a whole lot easier. However, the color that we are looking here that is out of gamut is based on a CMYK printer. And the CMYK printer that it's based on is this. Edit menu, down to your color settings. It's what we set up in our color settings in the very beginning. It's this CMYK US Web-Coded Swap version 2. By default, in North American prepress, this is the RGB color space. I mean, the CMYK color space. So that's what you're seeing is out of gamut right here. However, most of you guys are not doing CMYK conversions and going out to a web press. Most of you guys are actually going to an inkjet printer. So there is a way to preview what is in and out of gamut of an inkjet printer. The first thing is you need a profile that you have got of your inkjet printer. Now, most of the computers here, again, do not have these printer profiles. So I'm simply going to, you can follow this, but I don't think you're going to have the same list of profiles that I've got. To get to the profile of an inkjet printer, you come up to the View menu, down to Proof Setup. And you will see that by default, this working CMYK is what is picked. And that is, again, the CMYK one here in the color settings. This is the one that we set up right here. If you had set this up to like Japanese web-coded right here, then that's what you would actually be seeing this gamut warning of. But in our case, again, up to the View menu, down to Proof Setup. Instead of picking any of these, you want to pick Custom. And when you do pick Custom, a dialog box will open up with a device to simulate. And you will also see in this, in proofing conditions, that this is actually still set up to be a swap-coded version 2 CMYK printer. But if you click on this drop-down menu, you will have every profile that is loaded on your machine. Now, in my case, I have actually got a whole bunch of printers. These are all printer profiles for my Epson 2880. Again, you guys are not going to have the same thing that I've got right here. So I don't know what you guys are going to have. Is there any printer profile in there at all? Well, there's an Adobe. I mean, there's an Epson Standards guide. You guys really don't have a lot of them in here. So just watch my screen instead of this, because otherwise this isn't going to mean a whole lot to you. So I'm going to show you the difference of how some of this works. Right here, this is an Epson 3880 on enhanced matte paper. I'm going to go ahead and select that. And what I want you to watch is my out of gamut. And you see that that is actually got a much larger gamut than a typical CMYK printer would actually have. So then you ask yourself, if I was actually doing this, I'm going to go back to the regular swap-coded guy, to the working one here. If I was looking at this, I would say to myself, okay, I'm feeling like there is enough shit on this that is out of gamut that Perceptual is the rendering intent that I should be using, right? There's a lot of detail that's in this stuff right here. So even though I am going to change the entire color of the car, I'm going to change the entire color of the photograph. I think that the detail in here is worth preserving. So I'm going to use Perceptual rendering intent. It maintains all the detail. Most of the people who actually look at this will never know that the car has actually changed its complete color because the relationship of color has been maintained. Does this make sense? However, so I would use Perceptual rendering intent for that. However, if I was going to print this on an Epson, let's go to something that has a really high gamut. So I'm going to do this on an Epson 4900 on a premium glossy paper. Now look what happens. What is actually out of gamut now? There's a little bitty strip right along the very top of the car, and I bet you that's a spectral highlight. There is little to anything in here that is out of gamut. So what rendering intent am I going to use now? Relative colorimetric, because I'm not really going to lose anything here. I'm not losing detail, so I'm keeping all of the color pure. If I use Perceptual here, the color would be changed because it would still be considering these small little areas that are out of gamut. It would change those, and therefore it would change every color in this image. I think it's more important to maintain the purity of the color of this. But it is an informed decision now, not just somebody saying to you, oh, you always should use Perceptual. Does this make sense? Are there questions about this? Okay, so back to Rebecca's, because she's here now. Hi, Rebecca. I knew you were going to be late. You'd already warned me, so don't worry about it. I'm not like throwing you under the bus. Okay. So this is Rebecca's file, and I'm trying to think. Okay, I was just pointing out it's 16-bit here, but this is the other one that I actually really love. Is this her layer right here? Can you guys see this? She's very good about naming her layers. and I'll show you what it did. See the little guy right there? You have no idea how long my day had been when I got to this. And it just totally cracked me up. And it was like, okay, I can still soldier on. I'll get through the rest of this. But I just, at any rate, okay, so quick story. I was an English major in when I first went to college. And it was in my semester English creative writing class. And the teacher walks in and he says, okay, I'm going to start the story for you and you need to finish. This is the story. You're the last person in the world and you hear a knock on your door. And I was really pissed off that they would say something like that. If I'm the last person in the world, then by definition, there's not going to be a knock. Anyway, I just got really angry with it. So the way I finished the sentence was, I said, so I opened the door and screamed at the top of my lungs, fuck you, which was clearly directed right at the teacher. Turned in the essay. The next week goes by, and he comes in the class, whatever, and he's taught, well, yeah, there were some really interesting things, whatever. But I have to mention one essay in particular, and he pulls mine out, and he reads it, and he looks at me, and he says, I don't have a problem with profanity. However, I'm feeling like this is somehow, Mr. Engelhardt, I think you and I are going to have a problem, and I suggest you get in another class. And I stood up, and I walked out of the class, and there you go. Actually, I almost flunked out of my freshman year of college. That's a whole nother story. So anyway, I don't know why I had to tell you that story, but there you go. So 16-bit, Rebecca, just be sure that it's okay to work in that. It's just your computer is doing a lot of heavy lifting that possibly is unnecessary. Okay. Tyke actually takes this a step further. We'll look at the beginning one right here. And again, I don't have a problem with this because he does this right. It's just this, in his case, he actually is working in, and you can see right here, he actually is in ProPhoto RGB. However, he is also doing this in 16-bit. So again, my only rule about that, you can see the 16 right there. My only rule is if you want to be in that space, I'm okay with that, but it's got to be 16-bit. And you also just need to be aware of those pitfalls that I just talked to you about. And finally, Christina, where are you? Oh, here you are. So this was actually sort of an unusual one, and I just want to point this out. This only happened in one file, so I'm not entirely certain where that ended up happening. So the original, if you look at all these all appear to be normal smart objects. If you double-click on the first one, indeed, it's going to go in. It's in camera raw. It's exactly, you can reprocess your raw data. It's exactly what you want it to be. However, in the succeeding ones, the next one in, you will see that this actually opens up into another. So what is actually into its own file? This is more like the original smart object thing that we were doing. This is not based on on raw data anymore. This is actually what ended up happening, and I'm fairly certain I know what ended up happening in this, is that there was a copy made of this file, of this layer. So here's the copy. It gets rasterized because otherwise if you change its value, anything that's in here, it changes both of these, because I did not do that. Again, smart object, new smart object via copy. So these two are clones of one another. They're exactly the same. They're same reference to the same file. At any rate, to get this to do anything else, if you rasterize it, so again, layer smart object, rasterize, this becomes a normal guy. Then when I convert this into a smart object, it again is converted, but this is, again, it's just the protective container now. It's sitting inside here. This is not the raw data anymore. This is simply a copy of that layer. Make sense? Okay, almost done. That's all I got. Okay, so for today, are there questions about any or all of this? Okay, I think everybody's comfortable with that. I think everybody's comfortable with this. Let's do this really quickly. Again, I want to open up, this goes from last week, week number 4. There is the gradient number 2 in here. I want you to please open up gradient number 2. And you, again, will see this file. We're only going to go through this one more time really quickly. But again, this is the whole essence of how everything works in Photoshop. The image that you see in Photoshop is a consequence of only 3 masks, the red, the green, and the blue channel. Those 3 masks that are controlling this light that's actually coming through here. That's the only thing that's actually happened. Now, I don't really want you to do this because this is, I just want to show you a preview of this. This is actually not true. This does not really exist this way. Again, I've told you this before. You cannot have color in a channel. It does not exist. This top channel right here, if you grab this RGB guy and you try to drag it down, I'm going to move my channel palette up so you can see it. If you try to drag this RGB down and copy it, you'll see that you cannot do it. It's because this thing is not a true channel. You can, however, do it with either of your red, green, and blue. That part doesn't matter because these are true channels. They are black and white. However, to get some better sense of what's going on in these, you can preview your channels in color. To actually do that, I don't want you to leave this on. Just to give you a better sense of what is really happening. If you come up to the preferences and you come down to, I don't know where it is. I'm going to look here. Oh, right here. It's under the interface. If you click on this option down here, show channels in color, you'll actually see what these things are really truly doing. You will see that, again, in this red channel now, where you've got the red bar, it's letting all the red light in. Where you've got the green and the blue bar, absolutely no red is going in. As you start on the red gradient, you'll see that there's no red going in, but by the time you get all the way up to the white part of the gradient, it's allowing all of the red in. Does that sort of make sense what's going on? So this just gives you some sense of what this mask is allowing to happen. However, it is a mistake to leave that checked on because that is a falsehood to believe that these things are really in color. But that's how they're sort of functioning. So again, if you grab your rectangle marquee tool and simply drag out a selection and save it. So that's all we're going to do is we're going to go up to the select menu and come down and we're going to save this selection and I'm going to call it box and say okay. You will see that all of your selections are actually saved as channels. So if we hit Command D to deselect, that selection goes away. If you hover over the box, do not select it, do not click on it, simply hold down the Command key and click, you will load that selection again. Command D to deselect. If you hover over the red channel and actually hold down the Command key and click, you will actually load the red selection. To show you what that will really do, come back over to your Layers panel and hit Command J to jump it to its own layer. And you can actually see what it did. It selected the entirety of the red stripe. And then here in the black area, there was nothing really selected because that area was actually black. But as you started to move into the white area, this was a full selection. Remember, when you load any selection, it works just like a mask. The areas that are light or are white, what we would consider up in the 255s, are fully selected. The areas that are in the zeros and the black areas, whatever we would consider to be zero selected. The reason the red stripe was completely selected was it was the red layer that we were actually, a channel that we were actually doing it on, and that entire red stripe was completely white. The areas, and again, you can turn off the layer that you've actually jumped to reference it again to see what it was we're talking about, and turn on the background layer so you can see it. The areas that were down here in this darker area here on the mask are black areas. So these were very, very, very little selected. As you started to move up into midtones, somewhat selected. As you started to get up into the white areas, completely selected. The white stripe, the red stripe itself was totally selected because it was a white area of the mask. Does that make sense what's going on here? Okay, so when you load a selection, you are loading the luminosity of that selection. That's what you're actually loading. Does that make sense? So again, if we actually go over the RGB layer, which you can do, if you hover over it and Command click on it, we're going to actually save this selection so you can see what it looks like. If you come up to the select menu and you come down to save selection, type in luminosity because that is what it just selected. L-U-M-I-N-O-S-I-T-Y and say OK. Command D to deselect and then click on that layer and you'll see how it selected it. It's actually looking at the RGB layers and it looks at them tonally speaking. And tonally speaking, these are not white. Tonally speaking, the pure red is kind of a mid-tone. So is the pure green and so is the pure blue is a little bit darker. Green is actually a little bit lighter. the gradient actually selects exactly the way the gradient is, because again, the black areas here are not selected at all because we loaded the luminosity of this. The white areas are completely selected, so that's actually what's happening here. Does this make sense? Luminosity masking and selecting like this is going to become a huge issue for us. Are there any questions about this? Okay, Verser, let's do something. Okay. What is the most effective selection tool in all of Photoshop? Pen tool. How many people in this room know how to use the pen tool flawlessly? That always gets everybody. How many people in here have tried to use the pen tool and simply been frustrated by it? Oh, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to throw my hand up on that one. So I'm going to show you the right way to use the pen tool, how to use the pen tool. How many people here understand the difference in what the pen tool does and what everything else does? How many people understand the difference in pixel and vector? How many don't? Okay, perfect. This will be great. This will be great. So let's start with a brand new. You can close this guy up. I promise you I won't ever show you the gradient guy. Well, I don't know. I can't swear to that. I'm not promising a word. We're going to start with just a blank layer. Hit Command N to bring up the new layer dialog box. I typically do 8x10 at 300 pixel resolution. On RGB one, I'm going to change this to 8-bit, not 16-bit. And usually white is my background color. You can set all of that up here in this in your new dialog box and simply say OK. And it will actually open up a brand new screen for you. Looks like this. Then I want you to hit the Type tool. So hit the T key. And let me rearrange my screen just a little bit so that I can see. Again, remember, every time you click on a new tool, you want to be able to see this options bar that sits right up here. Now, you don't have to use the same font that I'm using. The fonts would be listed here in this drop-down menu. It is a sticky menu. So for me, the last font that I selected was this Helvetica New Standard. I don't care what font you have. It doesn't really matter at all. However, know that the fonts that you can pick in Photoshop are off this drop-down menu. And then the next thing over, if your font has more styles to it, so this Helvetica New has a huge number of weights to it. That's what all of these guys are. When you look at these numbers, like the 87, the number that starts in the beginning of this is actually the weight of the line that the letter is being drawn. And then in terms of whether it's condensed or bold or any of those kind of things, all of these things have to do with the style that's actually happening on the font. So you can see thin would be an extremely thin line. This is a 35 thin. There's an ultra light one. There's an italic one. So whatever. I want to just get basically a typical medium font going. I don't care, again, what your font is. If you bring your cursor over onto your screen, you will see the rough size of this font. This is actually too small. I don't want you to work with something that's quite this. Oh, well, actually, let's do work with something quite this small. So I'm going to say, if you look at this next line over, the next line over is your point size. And if you click, you'll see that there's a whole series of standard points here. However, you can have any point size that you really want. If you, again, hold your cursor over the T, this double T, it turns into the scrubby slider, which will allow you to scale your font point size up or your point size down. So let's type in, and you can also type in and simply put in a value. So let's put in a 24-point size and simply click on your screen. Now, when you click on your screen, you will see that you get this thing called a type layer. It's sitting right here. And I want you to just type in a letter. I'm going to type in a capital. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to give myself a capital and put in the letter T. Now, I got a letter T in black because my foreground color was black. If this color right up here, when you open up the font tool, it will also copy whatever your foreground color is. It copies it right into this part of your menu bar. If you just did that and you, unfortunately, your background color was white, you're not going to be able to see it. So if that happened, simply hit the delete key to get rid of that letter. Click on this space to bring open the color picker. You can then actually just type in 000 and say OK. This will now be your font color. It will be black, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to put in a capital T. And I'm going to simply hit the Enter. I'm not going to hit the Enter key. I'm going to click on the layer underneath this, and that goes ahead and makes a T. And you can see it's right here. Is everybody good with that? Did that not work for anybody? You're going to click on the background layer now to actually accept that. And you'll see you get a little preview on your layer. I want you to copy that layer now, the T layer. So go up to the layer menu, click on it, drag it down, make a copy of it, and it'll say T copy. But finally, I want to rasterize this. This first T, actually both of these right now are what we call vectors. And what a vector is, don't let the word freak you out, and it doesn't really matter even if you remember it. It's just to remember how it functions. What a vector is a mathematical description of this letter. It's not just a pixel version of the letter. It is a mathematical description of it. And I'll show you what that actually means. So I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this top layer and make it pixels. So to make the copy that we just made, come up to the layer menu, come down to rasterize, and come over to type and rasterize this. This is now a pixel version of that T. If you turn off the T that's underneath, you won't see anything change because the one that was sitting on top of it is exactly the same thing. However, this top copy, you will notice the difference. Look at this top copy. You will actually see that there's a whole area of transparency around this. This thing completely changed. And that T is sitting up there. That T is actually a vector. Is a pixel copy of this. Does that make sense? And to show you what the difference is, turn off the pixel version of it that's sitting up here, call copy. Turn back on your letter T. Click on this layer to actually make it active. If you then bring your cursor into the icon of the T in your layers palette, if you double click on this now, it will select your T again. And we can change its size. If you come over to the T, again, the scrubby slider, you can click and you can drag this up in scale. And I'm going to go up. We were at 24. I'm going to go up to 200%, up to a pixel point size of 200. And hit again. I'm going to click outside of it to go ahead and commit that. Then if you want to center this T a little bit better, simply hit the V key, gives you the move tool, and you can move your T. Again, make sure that the T is layer selected. You can actually move this down to actually see it. And when you look at this, you say to yourself, okay, well, this ended up really good. The corners of this are fine, whatever. If you double click on this again, you can actually get to go up even bigger. So really crank this thing up. Make it actually a really big T on your screen. And oops. Again, click outside of that. So now I've got a really big T. And what you see on this is, again, all my edges on this are actually done really well. They look great, right? But now let's do this to your other T. So turn off this guy. Click on this, your rasterized pixel version of this. Yes? You need to click the eyeball on next to it. Turn that eyeball off. Turn that eyeball on. Okay, so with this layer selected, I'm going to transform this thing. I'm going to make it bigger as well. How do I load this thing as a selection so that I can transform it? Exactly. If you simply hover over this T right here and hold down the Command key and click, it will load this thing as a selection. We can transform it now. We want to make it bigger, just like we did with the other one with the original T down here. So Command T is the option to do that. If you cannot remember that, it's just up here at the Edit menu down to, make sure that this T is actually the layer that is active. And then up here to the Transform, Free Transform, and we're just going to scale this to make it larger. You can do the same thing with the scrubby slider. I'm going to click on the chain link between width and height to keep these two together. And then again, I'm simply going to hover over either the H or the W, it doesn't matter which one, and click and start to drag up to make this thing bigger. And as I start to get bigger and bigger and bigger, I'm going to move this out of so I get a little bit more to the center. And then I'm going to continue to make this bigger and bigger and bigger. And I get up to 1500%, and that's about as far as it's going to actually let me go. Command D to deselect. And look at what has happened to the edge. If you zoom into this guy, look at what's going on here. You've actually lost the entire quality of this edge. This thing is falling apart. If you go back and look at your original T that you made really good and bright and crisp here, the first one, the original one that's still the vector, this thing is actually perfect. So again, if you double click on, I'm going to double click on the hand to scooch all the way back down. What you'll see is this, what's happening is this. The initial T that we made is actually a vector, what they call a vector. It's a mathematical of that T. You can make it as large and it's small. You can keep doing big and small and big and small and big and small and big and small and big and small forever. If I do that to the pixel version of the T, do you think it's going to stay intact like that? No, it will completely, eventually it'll disintegrate. Because one is a mathematical description, the other is a pixel version of it. It is the picture of the T. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that not make sense to anyone? To really see what that means, though, as a vector, turn off the copy, the top guy. Make sure that this guy is selected. The T is actually selected. And come over to the, actually, we're not going to do that. I'm going to do something else. No, actually, I take that back. I am going to do this if I can figure out how to do it. No, I'll do something else first. So hang on. So basically, when you use the pen tool in Photoshop, what you're actually doing with that tool is you're creating a vector instead of a pixel selection. Does that make sense? Does that not make sense to anybody? So I'm going to do something that is going to create a mathematical description of a selection. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're actually going to do this. I'm going to show you how to use the pen tool. So I need you guys to open a file for me. If you go into, you can close this T up. It's done its job. We don't need to keep this guy. If you go and look into this week's folder, class 5 weeks folder inside of yours, there's a file in there called Viacom Path. If you just double click on that, it's a TIFF. It'll probably open in preview. So instead, drag it on top of Photoshop so that we've got it in Photoshop. It's going to give me a warning saying that this thing doesn't have an embedded profile. It doesn't matter. There's no color in this image. So simply say OK. And you will see what it is we're actually working with. I'm going to park my layers guy back over. Please. Okay, so I want everybody to zoom into the V. Again, the shortcut to get into the V is holding down the space bar and the command key. You temporarily get the magnifying glass. And again, if you only hold the space bar by itself, you get the hand, so you can sort of position this. So I'm ready to actually outline this V using a path. So to do that, it is the pen tool, and it is this little guy right here. I want to show you something first, though. You should have this both in, yes, you do have this pen tool PDF. I'm going to show you the recipe of how you should set up to use the pen tool. This is not only a PDF that is in your assignment folder, this is also on the Moodle website. This was actually written by a guy back in version 6 of Photoshop, not CS6, but literally version 6. There was a workbook, no, cookbook for Photoshop, whatever. One of the most brilliant writers about Photoshop that I ever read, and finally I read this thing and it was like, okay, this is how you use the pen tool. He made it so simple. And so I'm passing that one on to you guys, but that's where this whole thing comes from. Anyway, this is the thing. It describes every step that I'm going to show you right now. So don't feel like you need to write all this down. I would much rather you really just do this work with me. Okay. If you still want to take notes, that's fine. I don't really care. I will tell you this right now. Using the pen tool with a tablet is very difficult to do. And the reason it's difficult to do is this. We're going to actually set points on this image. We're going to come in. We're going to set a point, like right in this very top corner, and then we're going to come down here and do another one and up here. And the issue is that with your tablet, when your pen is hovering over it and you've got it perfectly lined up and ready to hit just at the intersection that you want, you still have to move the pen down to hit your tablet. And when you do that, more often than not, it travels off of your point just slightly. So instead, if you use a mouse is actually the best thing to do pen work with, because then with the mouse, you can put your point right on the intersection that you want and then click the mouse and it will drop the point much more precisely. Does that make sense? So I see people try to do this with the pen tool a lot, and it's just not the right tool to do this with. Trackpad is better. It's not ideal. Mouse is great if you actually have one, and that's how I usually do my work. But anyway, so I would suggest in your all's case, because you do have a mouse to use with this guy, this is the one you actually use. So the pen tool is this guy. It's sort of in the lower middle part of the toolbar. It's this guy right over here. When you click on this, again, I cannot see my options palette because there is another window open right here. This is a window that's open in my Finder. It's hiding the application frame right now. So for me to see my application frame, simply go up to Photoshop, down to Hide Others, and it will hide everything else. And so then now I can actually see my application frame. When you do that, you want to make sure that this drop-down menu is set to path. This is actually the pen tool. We are going to generate a path out of this guy. This whole set of icons that you have right here are how paths interact, how you have multiple paths. We are not going to deal with any of this part today. However, this part over here we are going to deal with. There's two things over here you have to have set up to actually make this thing work correctly. The first one is the little wheel. If you click on the little wheel, it'll come down in this drop-down menu. You will see rubber band. You want to check that rubber band. I'll show you what that actually is in just a second. And the next thing that you want to actually have checked here is the auto add a delete checkbox. You want that guy enabled as well. So again, the pen tool is what I've got selected. It is the P key. That is the shortcut for the pen tool. If you simply hit the P key, you'll go to the pen tool. Path is selected here. The rubber band option is enabled, and auto add and auto delete is selected. So your first job is to come over and put your little crosshairs right on the top corner of the V and simply click once. And when you do that, it'll drop a point down. And as you move your mouse away, now I'm not dragging my mouse. I've actually let go. I clicked once. I did not keep the button held down. I simply let go, clicked once, let go. And you will see that there's this line that follows my mouse wherever I go. That is actually the rubber band. If you click without this, don't do this. Just watch my screen. If you uncheck rubber band, you will see that I don't have that. It's still there. When I actually click this second point down here, it will actually draw a line between these two. But having the rubber band actually on really helps you see. It's an enabler in terms of being able to draw this path. So there's my rubber band again. So I want you to simply come down to the very bottom of the V. Again, get your crosshairs on that guy and click once, and you'll see you've got another point down here. Finally, come up to the top of the V, click again, across to the top, click again, down to the bottom, click, up to the top, click, and across. And you will see when you get back to your original point, the very first one that you set down, you get this little icon that looks like the pen tool. This is an indication that you're actually going to close your path. So if you simply, it's when you, not the little plus sign, but when you get the little circle that's right next to that, that is an indication that your path will then be complete. And if you click on that, what you'll see is that all of your points now will be black, and you have started to create your path. Who is this not working for? We all good on this? Okay. To continue our path, if you come over to the I and do the very same thing again, simply start at the top. You can go in the other direction if you want to. It doesn't matter which of these you go into. But I want you to go ahead and select the I really quickly for me. And then come up to the top. And again, you'll get the little circle next to the pen, and that's an indication that you are completing this path. Now, once we've got this second one done, if you hold down the space bar, again, you get the hand, and you can slide this over to actually go after the A. But before we go after the A, I want you to look at something, and it's this over here. It's the other palette that is right next to layers on your, in the palettes over on the right-hand side, and it is paths. And if you click on that, you will actually see this thing called work path, and you will also see the VI that you've actually selected. Now again, if your icons, what you're actually viewing here, are too small, let me anchor this to this guy. If these are too small, you'll see how big mine is. If yours are too small to see this, if you want to see it's big, if you want to get your preview here bigger, again, you simply click on the drop-down menu down to Path Options, and you click on the largest of the thumbnails, and then you will actually be able to see this guy. But what you'll also see right here is that your work path, it has not been named yet. This is a temporary thing. However, this guy is highlighted. I want everybody to notice that. Your path is highlighted, right? If you click outside of the path, you will see that highlight go away. You still have the VI is still there. However, if you click outside of that, this is no longer highlighted. If you now come over to actually do the A of Viacom, we're going to start it. So simply come down to the bottom and click to set your point at this. What you'll notice is just happen is that all the work that you did, the V is gone, the I is gone. This is generating a brand new work path. And the reason that happened is that this work, the thing that you had on there called work path, was a temporary thing. In order to save this work, you have got to save your paths. This will always be temporary. And the minute you select out of this path and select and start another path, this thing will revert back to it'll be starting from scratch. So if you've done that, come over to your history palette down to close path. That is the last one that we did, to get this work path back again, because I don't want to make you do that laborious work of selecting the V and I again. But now to actually save this, if you come over to this drop down, so again, the path is selected in the path palette. It is highlighted, this thing called work path. If you select this drop down menu, you can now click on it and do save path. And a dialog box will come up, and I'm actually just going to type in V1 for mine, because that's all that's on here so far, and click OK. Now when you click outside of this and the path is no longer active, just like we did before, now when you start the A again, you will see you get the temporary work path, which is exactly what we want, but the VI, you don't lose the VI. This will actually be saved with your file. This is not a temporary thing like history. When you save your file, this will get saved with your file. When you open up your file 50 years from now, this thing will still be sitting there. Are there questions about this so far? Everybody good? Yes. So you can click on top of the A. You're not going to do this guy's still active. Click outside of it. Okay. So I need everybody now to go ahead and select the A. So no matter how you want to do it, I'm going to select the A, again, up to the top, down, over, up, down, and over again, and complete the path. I get the little circle. So now what I've actually got is a situation where I've got the V and the I is on one path, but the A is actually on a separate one right now, and I want them on the same, I want them to all be on the same path. I want this whole Viacom thing to be there, and I realized that, oh shit, I didn't do it right. I did the A, it's outside, it's on the work path. I should have done it here. I didn't do it. Paths are actually copy and pastable. So to do this, to actually move the A back up to where the VI is, you can do one of two things. You can come up to the edit menu and you can come down and you can do a cut, which will eliminate it. However, that path is now sitting on the clipboard. Or you could have done copy. Again, it would have been edit copy. It would have left the work path and copied that path to the clipboard. Either way, I think it's a little bit cleaner to do a cut and paste than a copy and paste. So then you don't end up with two versions of that path. So then, again, click on the VI to make it active, up to the edit menu, down to paste, and you will see that it has now put the A path together with the V and the I. Does that make sense to everybody? So paths are copy and pastable. They are also, you can also duplicate them. So for instance, you could click on this again to make the VI. It's now got the A in it as well. Doesn't matter that it's just named this way. You can click and drag this down to the little dog-eared guy, and you now have got two copies of those paths. Does that make sense? If you've done that, hit Command Z to undo it, because I really don't need 2 copies of this path. What I need now is to actually go after the C, and the C is going to be the magic trick. This is going to be the thing that everybody, again, who's ever been frustrated with the pen tool ends up having, and so we're going to eliminate all of this. So the first thing that I want to show you is this. If you come over and you actually click on the pen tool, you'll get this flyout menu, and you can see that you've got a whole series of other pen tools, options that you've got. You've got the freeform pen tool, the add anchor point, the delete, the convert, all of this kind of shit. This is the thing people hate about the pen tool. It's too fucking confusing. The convert points. Well, I don't even know what fucking point I have. I know I've got a point. Is it a corner point or I don't know what it is. That's why everybody hates the tools, right? So I promised you I was going to make the tool simple and easy for you guys to use. We are never, ever, ever going to use the bottom 4. We are only ever going to use the pen tool. So I have just eliminated 80% of your options in the pen tool. 80% of those are gone. Radical simplification. Aren't you happy? Yes. So with all of that gone, we are going to select a pen tool. Now I need everybody to watch this first before you try it. And then I'm going to show you a couple versions of this, and then I'm going to go around the room to make sure that this is actually working for everybody. But this is the secret to using the pen tool successfully. So don't do this. Just watch right now. I'm going to click my first point up here in the very top corner. And then a lot of people would think that you could actually click down here and drag a curve out that will describe all of this. You can't. Don't be that greedy. Maybe the best pen artist in the world can do this, but you can't. I don't even try. So instead, I do this. I bite off chunks of this that are manageable for me. So I'm not even going to try and go down here and describe this whole curve right here. I'm simply going to come somewhere in about like this. And then when I get here, I'm going to click, and I'm going to hold my mouse down. Now, my mouse is still being held down. And I'm actually going to use my finger to drag a line out. And you will see when you drag this line out that you get these handles that come off this point. The direction that you drag is the direction you want your curve to go. So in my case, the curve is coming down this part of the C, so I drag in that direction. You'll also notice if I drag in the opposite direction, there's no way I'm going to get that rubber band line to describe this curve. So again, it's click and drag in the direction you're trying to go. The further out you drag, you will see as you start to move the handle up and down, you are really affecting the curve that is closer to the very first point that we laid down, the one that's at the very top of the C. The shorter you keep that line that you actually drag out, the more the curve is being affected right next to this point that I've just put down. What you want to do, and this is purely an instinctual thing, you want to drag it out till you actually can fit this, till the rubber band line actually fits the curve and it looks like this. And let go. We're only halfway there. Don't do this yet. Watch me. So the problem now that a lot of people run into is that now you've actually got another point that you could possibly click and drag, but these control handles are still active on this point right here. And this is the part that gets so confusing to everybody. It's like, well, I start to draw out the next curve line, but the point that I had left behind is still controlling this. You need to make it as if you're starting from scratch. To do that, you come back to this original center point, you hold down the Option key and you click once, and it eliminates that second control handle. Now you can start over just like you just did that point. I'm going to click and drag out another line that matches this curve. I'm going to let go of my mouse, return to the center point, hold down the Option key, and click to kill the second handle. And finally do this one last time. Click and drag to get into that point, to get the curve to match that. Let go, return to my center point, hold down the Option key, and click to get rid of the second handle. So I need you guys to start this with me now. I'm going to go back in time to where I am at. Let me just paste this guy to get where you are. Okay, so we're going to start it over. At the very top, click at the top of the C. Come about of a third of the way into it. If you imagine this thing as a clock face, I'm somewhere around 10 o'clock. I am going to click and hold down my mouse button and drag in the direction that I want to draw my path. And again, getting it to fit the path, you're on your own on this one. If you make this too short, it doesn't fit. If you make it too long, it doesn't fit. This becomes something that you actually get. It's an instinctual thing. It's actually somewhat therapeutic, and some people could argue that it's actually fun to sort of actually land right on that line if you can do it. Let go of your mouse. Return to the center point, hold down the Option key and click once. It will get rid of that second control handle. Come down to about 8 o'clock, click and drag, fit the curve in as best you can. Let go of the mouse, circle back to the center point, hold down the Option key, click and get rid of that. And finally, one last one, click and drag, hold down the center point, click. Hold down the, come back to the center point, hold down the Option key and click once to get rid of it. Who is this not working for? Is this working for all you guys? Are we all good on this? Wow, this is the first class that's ever happened. Rebecca's shaking her head no. Okay, let's just start back with this. Oh, no, this is a great thing to bring up right now. Another great thing to bring up right now. Great thing to bring up right now. Everybody, look at the screen right here, really quick. You fuck up. Now, there's all sorts of ways to go back and get all of these tools right here to undo your fuck up. To click on this flyout menu here and come out and pick one of the, I don't know, one of the add, remove, whatever. I fucking don't know how this works. I don't use it. Because I use the pen tool. Pen tool is an amazing tool. I use it every day of my life. I have no idea what these things do. I don't know how to convert shit. I don't know how to add and subtract. I don't do any of that. If you fuck up on your pen stuff, you simply go to your history palette and you work your way back in history to the point that you screwed up and you start from there. History is the only way to undo a mistake in the pen tool. Do not try to fix it. If you fix it, you'll just start laying down more points. Your path will go to hell. Then you'll say, that son of a bitch person never taught me how to really do this. I'm pissed. This is working for, okay. So that one is perfect. Let go of your mouse. Come back to there, hold down the Option key, and click once on that point. And it kills the second control line. Let go of the Option key. Come and pick your next point down, click and drag, and form your next point. Again, drag in the direction that your line's going to go. Okay, is this working for everybody? Then finally, one of the beautiful things about this is that once you get back to the bottom part of the C, let me get there really quickly myself. So again, I clicked and dragged. I'm holding down the Option key. I'm killing that point. I'm simply going to come down here, click and drag, hold down the Option key, come back, get rid of that point. Click and drag to get to here. Again, hold down the Option key to get rid of this point. And now you're actually back to a part of the curve that has no handles. And this now will work exactly the same way you were doing the V and the I and the A. These are now straight line segments. You don't click and drag at all. You simply take your point to the top part of this of C right here, and you simply click once, just like we had done when we were outlining the A and the I and the V. However, in this part right here, this is curved. So again, don't get too greedy about this. Don't bite off more. Some people would try to describe this entire arc with one curve, and it simply will not work. So again, I'm going to go in roughly about 8 o'clock, click and drag to get my control, to get my line out. Hold down the Option key to get rid of that point. Up here till about 11 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock, somewhere in there. Click to get the curve to fit in. Hold down the Option key, kill that point. Finally get to this part of the C. Make that into the curve, click and hold to get rid of that point. And then going back up to the top, you're not going to click and drag at all. This is a straight line part of the curve. You're simply going to click to complete the path. Did this work for everybody? Yes.
Sometimes when I do that, it takes the first.
Should not happen like that. So hit Command Z to undo it. Hit Command Z one more time because we're not doing it up in here. Click and drag. We need to come up here. Now click and drag. Don't hold down any key right now. Click and drag in the direction your path is going. Perfect. Stop. Let go of the mouse. Now hold down the Option key. That, and you're good to go. So click the next one. So go ahead and finish up the C. Is everybody able to finish the C on this? What's the liability that I've got with my C right now? This is a work path. It is temporary. I can save this though. You can save as many paths as you want. I could copy this and put it up with the Vicom, or I could simply come over here and save this path, and I'm going to call it C, just because I can. Now I don't need to worry about losing this by starting a whole new path. So if you've done this much, let's go after the O. I'm going to start at the top of the O because this is the last thing we're going to do, and you need to see something on this. So again, I'm simply going to do the very same method that I did to get the C selected. Simply click and drag, hold down the Option key, get rid of that. Click and drag, get rid of this. Click and drag, get rid of that. Click and drag, get rid of this. And finally now, on your final point, you can click and drag it as well. We didn't have to do that on the C, but you're going to have to do that on the O. And I will tell you this. This is another one of those things. There's so many things you wish in Photoshop you could do really fucked up. You know, when you're doing a lot of, especially in retouching, we're going to get into very, very tedious retouching, and you wish you could just, I don't know, get really drunk or stoned, watch a movie while you're doing it. You can't. You can listen to stuff. Pen tool work, I will tell you this right now. Everybody, anyway. One of the largest parts of the retouching industry in India is building paths. Most people send this work out to actually have it done. Just to show you how important this is, there are entire factories of people, hundreds of people, who do nothing all day except this. There is not a single product shooter in the world who does not have every single thing in that product outlined as a path. There's not a single car shot in the world that is not every single element of that car is a path. So what do I really mean by that? Every headlight, not only the bulb, but the trim, the highlights on the trim, every single one of those is a separate path. This is how people really control Photoshop. This is where the control part really comes in. Does this apply to people? Yes, it does. You're going to see this happen right now. But I'm just telling you this right now. All the retouching that exists in commercial photography, a huge part of it, I can't say 100%, that would be because I really don't know. But a massive amount of this gets the first step everybody does is to make really complex sets of paths of everything. So if you're doing some dress, every single button is its own path. Every single tooth of the zipper is a path. I mean, it's just insane. But once you get that, you have the ultimate control. If you look at the paths that they do on a typical car shooting, they are in the thousands. Thousands and thousands and thousands of them. A typical hour's worth of path work in India is about 9 cents, 10 cents. Just so you know. Anyway, yes? Oh, that's fine. Don't worry about it. We're actually, no. So, because I've got the same thing on mine, right? But I have completed the path. So Harith is asking me, what about this line that's sitting up here? Well, I've got this complete path. The path has been completed. However, you'll notice that it's just a solid O on my path palette on my, the path. I can't call this a layer, but basically on this guy. So we're going to go after the center of it right now. Photoshop is very smart. Photoshop understands that we are going to do a path inside another path. So simply the minute you click on the center part, you will actually be starting a complete new path. And again, so go ahead and do the O for me, if you will, really quickly. And again, hold down the Option key and click. And once this has happened, you can actually, again, you're still going to have that last of the little handles sticking out. You can actually simply come over and click outside of the path, and all of that part will go away. Now, in my case, again, I've got the C and the O are on their own layer. They're on their own path layer. I really want to get everybody together all in the same one. So I'm simply going to click on the C and O version of this. In this case, instead of cutting it, I'm going to copy it. So again, up to the Edit menu, down to Copy, and then over to the VI path layer, and then Paste, in my case, Command V, and it will actually put those two on there. Now, if I want to, I can grab the CO layer that I don't need anymore because I've put it all together on the same one, and I can drag this to the trash if I want. So a lot of those very same things happen down here. These guys down here work exactly the same way as up here. Make sense? Okay, so finally, if you want to, we might as well go after the M really quick because we've gotten this far. So simply hit the M. The M should be relatively simple. There's no curves in here. By the way, the name of those curves that we're drawing, those double-handled curves, they actually have a name. They're actually called brazier curves. Just so you know, if you ever hear that term, that's what it is. Again, these are mathematical descriptions. The thing we're doing right now is a mathematical description of this. And finally finish this last one out. Again, I'm on a work path right now because I didn't do it on my path. If you guys had selected your VI path and done it, you'd be fine. I didn't do that on mine, so I'm simply going to cut and paste that to get the on there. And now I've got my Viacom. If I were you right now, if you've done all this, I would actually save this. I think this is part of your homework. No, this is not. I'd save it anyway. So I'm going to actually save mine, and I'm just going to put it in my TOS folder. And say OK. All right. So are there questions about this? Does this work for everybody? Okay, so let's use this thing. How do we use this thing? Well, typically you would want to use this as a selection. So I'm going to load this thing as a selection. How do I load this as a selection? Command click. It works here as well. Command click. Just loaded this thing as a selection. I'm going to go back into my layers palette. I'm going to click on the Viacom and actually put a blank empty layer up on top of that. So simply was back into my layers palette, up to the top. I added a new layer by simply clicking on the dog-eared guy right down here at the bottom. Look up at my screen if you don't know what I'm talking about. So this is what I did. I've got an active selection going. Simply clicking on this guy. It adds it up on top. And then I'm going to fill it with my foreground color, which happens to be black. The option delete will actually do that. Command D to deselect. There is no way in the world you can do a better selection than this. When you start working with it a lot, you get really fast at it. You get really good at it. But how else would you have made that selection? None of the selection tools would have found those little bitty lines. They just wouldn't do it. So there would have been no way to actually do this. Look at the quality of the work that you guys just did. Look at that. That's insane. Are we good? Okay. A couple other things I want to show you really quickly. If you've done all that, turn Viacom off because it makes it really hard to see. Go back into your path palette, select the Viacom layer, and what you'll notice now is this. If we zoom in on this guy, I'm going to come down here and take a look at this. If we actually zoom in on this guy like this, you don't see your path, and nothing is actually visible. To actually see your path, there's two other tools that you need to know about. Under the pen tool is the text tool, and the reason the text tool is in this group is because text is paths. When you use the text thing, it's simply doing this for you. It's actually describing those letters as paths. You can actually modify them. I'll show you how to do that later. But underneath it is an arrow. There's two versions of it. There's a black arrow that's on by default. If you click the flyout menu, you will get the white arrow. You can have one of the two. So we'll start with the black arrow first. If you actually grab the black arrow first and you come over and you click on your path, it will actually select the V. That's the one that I clicked on. If you then click outside of that, again, to get rid of that selection, you've actually got to click below the path layer over in the path palette. Click on that, we'll get rid of it. Make your path active again. Still using the black tool, you can actually click and drag out a rectangle. And when you do that, no matter, it will select every single path that you actually hit. The problem with this tool, though, is this. If you continue to click on this, you'll notice if you can click on one of the points, nothing actually changes. It selects the entire path, nothing else. It doesn't select anything else. For instance, if I come over here and I'm going to now select the A, it selects the A part as well. That's, you know, but again, it's not selective. I can't select any of these individual points to actually change them. That's actually the purview of the white arrow. If you come and you click the direct selection tool, it's the white arrow guy right here. This arrow right here, you can now actually come over and click a single point, and you'll notice when you click that single point, so I'm going to get you guys all on the same page as me. So I'm going to click outside of my Vicom. I'm clicking down here below, so no path is selected. I'm going to come up to the top to make the path active, and we'll do this on the V. So come over here to the V. Again, I've got the white tool selected, which is the direct selection tool. When you click on this path right now, you will actually see that it actually did select the path. However, what's different from this is that you will see these are all white points. They're actually supposed to be hollow. That's very different than the direct selection tool, the black one. If you select the black one, and again, you will see that these points now are all black, you can actually click and drag this path and you can move it. However, you cannot click any one of the points and move it. You can only move the entire path. If you've done all this, go back in history to get back to where you've actually got the V is lined up again. And this time instead, select the white tool. Now when you click on your path, again, it selects all the points. However, these points now are all hollow. If you click on any one individual point, you will see it turns black. Now when you move this, you only move the one black tool, the one black point. You do not move the entire path. You're only moving that one specific direct point. So if you're ever drawing a path and all of a sudden you realize that it's not quite perfect, you can actually use this guy to come back, select one single point to finesse your selection. Is this working for all of you guys? Okay. So I'm going to click outside of this right now, and I'm going to ask you guys, I want to build, and this will be the last thing that we do, and then we'll take a break. I want to build a dovetail. I've got a path right here that's selecting the V. But I also want to do a path that actually selects the negative space. The negative space, it's sitting right in the crux of the V. Does that make sense what I'm trying to do? So what I want to do is I want a path that will actually select this area right in here. And we can even run it along this. There's a blue guideline that's up here. So I just want to select this part right here. So what do you think the chances are that I can go in and start a brand new path right now to select this area and have it perfectly fit the first path that I did, the original V? What's the likelihood that I'm going to get those lines to touch perfectly? I'm giving you the answer. 0 chance. You will never, in a million years, draw another path that is perfectly going to fit this guy. It simply won't happen. You will be off somewhere. Do you believe that, or you want to try it? You all know this is true, right? So how do I build the perfect dovetail? Because a lot of times you need to do this. By dovetail, you understand what I mean. I'm looking for the area that fits inside of it. This is like the key in the lock. It's another metaphor. Hand in a glove, other metaphor. You get what I'm trying to select here, right? I'm trying to select this area to make it the perfect area in here. So to do that, to actually make this thing perfect, I've got to start with the original path that I've made. So to do that, select, you can do this with either of the tools. It doesn't, either the black or the white guy. Again, I'm making this path layer active. I'm going to select this. I am then going to copy it up to the edit menu, down to copy. Then I'm going to come over to my flyout menu here, and I'm actually going to do a new path. You will see it's going to ask me for the name, and I'm going to just call it Dovetail V or Dov V. and say OK. And you'll see it creates another one down here that's actually named. And now you can hit Command V to paste it. And actually, that does not look like that put that guy in there. It looks like it only put in this one set of lines. So if you've done this, drag that to the trash. We're going to do this again. Select the Viacom to make it active. This time I'm actually going to use the black path selection tool to select all of the points. Again, Command C will copy that, or up to the edit menu, down to copy. Then again, new path, flyout menu, new path. I'm going to call this Dove V. And say OK. And then again, up to the edit menu, down to paste, or Command V will actually paste it. And now you've got a second copy of the V. And the reason I wanted to do that is because these 3 points that are making up this crux right here, I can use them again. I can use them as a second time to actually build the path that's going to be this insert right here. Does that make sense where I'm going? Okay, so this is the tricky part. If you don't follow this, watch the video again, post it in the excuse me, do you know how to do this part? But this is the part we're actually going to do. So I want to keep this point, I want to keep this point, and I want to keep this point. If you go to the direct selection tool, the white one, and you click on this point right here, you will see that all of the other points became hollow. This is the only black one, and that means it's the only active point that has been selected. And if you've done that, you can hit the delete key and that point will go away. This point is still here, this one is still, this one, all the others are still there, but this one corner point here is now gone. If again, still using the white tool, you select the V down at the point at the bottom, you will see it stays black. All of the others become clear. That is an indication that this point alone has been selected. Hit the delete key, it now goes away. And finally come up here to this point right here, the final one over here. Click on this point, it stays black, indicating it is active. All of the others have gone clear, they're not active. Hit the delete key, that point is now gone. Finally, go back to the pen tool and select the pen tool. Come over either this point or this point, it doesn't matter which one. Click on it and you will pick up your path again. And then finally come over and close it. And you have now got the perfect dovetail that's actually built from your original path. Did that work for you guys? Yes.
Do you want to get
You still got a selection going, so hit Command D because that's just going to be confusing.
So
Okay.
do you want it to be the pen plus or?
Yeah, exactly. You're just going to hover over it and get that point. Click, and then you know, just come across and get your other point. Although it looks like you dragged in the middle, so go back in history and undo that. So go back to clear path. You're good now. Select pencil again. Click once. Right on that point. Click. Let go. You still got selection on Command D to deselect it. So again, hover over that guy and now click. And let go. You're see is your down up the little gear. Just come over to the little gear. Little gear. That. Oh, there it is. Yep, and click. And you've now got it. Okay. So now you could actually load this as a selection as well. So again, Command click on this to load it as a selection. Go back into your layers palette, back into the layer that you built originally that says Viacom, and you'll see this guy right here. And now you can actually fill this as well. Command D to deselect. I've obviously moved mine slightly because that's why I'm not getting this dovetail right here. This actually should be perfect because I did not add any of those lines, but yours should have worked. Yeah, Tykes is perfect in here. So yeah, what some of you will see is that actually a really baby fake little white line. You know what that line is? It is 1 pixel's worth of data, and it actually represents the thickness of your path, the actual point of it itself. If you zoom way in, you'll see what it is I'm talking about. you would never end up with an ultimate. In my case, you're never going to see this, but it's this absolutely little faint white line. This is somehow I kicked mine out of alignment. But is this making sense, what we're talking about here? Are we good on this? Okay, great, because when we come back, we're actually going to do a complex one of these in class. So let's take a quick 10-minute break and come back, and we will, this is the beginning. We are moving into the beginning. Last week, we did a selection based on a channel, complex selection, the hair. This week, we're going to do, this is another selection method. Again, all of this is building up to ultimately compositing work. So that's what this is all about. So hang in there.